Hey everybody, my name is Michael Griswold, and this video is entitled, Why in the World Would a Bank Accept a Short Sale? So first, what's a short sale? Well, a short sale is when a lender accepts less than what they are owed on a mortgage. For example, let's say a homeowner owes $200,000 to the bank for their home. In a short sale, a bank would agree to accept less than that. Let's say on average about $165,000 for this $200,000 debt. Now when I talk to people about short sales and explain this to them, invariably the next question that people come up with is, are you on crack? And for the record, no. I've never even tried. So here's why it makes sense. First, foreclosures cost banks a lot of money. We'll get into it later on in this video, but it costs a lot of money for a bank to foreclose on a home. It costs them the money from attorney's fees, it costs them money in holding costs, it costs them money in eviction costs, taxes and insurance. We'll get into all that a little bit later, but the first point to understand is that it costs banks a lot of money to foreclose. Second, banks are in the lending business. They're not in the real estate business. Banks make their money from lending money. They borrow it at a lower rate and they lend it at a higher rate. Having properties that they own messes up their business model and really hinders their velocity of money. And third, and this is very interesting, if a bank gets a certain number of bad or defaulting loans on its books, it gets in trouble with the Fed, which is short for federal government. Here's what happens. If a bank has a certain percentage of their books is at a non-performing asset ratio, it's typically 3%. If a bank's non-performing asset ratio is 3% or higher, they can start getting in trouble with the Fed, and the Fed can start regulating how much money they can borrow. Now, if your business is borrowing money to lend it, and you're being regulated on how much you can borrow, that pretty much puts a stranglehold on your business. Bad news. So let's look at, what does it cost the bank to foreclose? Well, first, it costs time. This equates to money because each month that passes without the bank getting paid is a month they are liable for the debt. Remember, banks borrow money to lend it, so if they're not getting paid, they're losing money. So in other words, if a bank is not getting paid the mortgage, they still have to pay it out. So instead of the homeowner paying it, the bank is now paying it. Another thing it costs is attorney's fees. And if anybody's been to an attorney recently, you know that that is not cheap. So let's look at an example to really make sure that this is solid. $200,000 is what's owed. $200,000 is what the property's worth. And let's say that for whatever reason, the homeowner can no longer afford the house. Right? So here are the options. A homeowner could sell using a realtor. That'll cost 6% of the sale. In this case, it would cost $12,000. Or they could try to refinance. But that's not likely since they don't have any equity. They could do a deed in lieu, which is basically a foreclosure without any cost to the bank. This is where the homeowner gives that deed of the house back to the bank and then basically is evicted. So none of these are real advantageous because if they sell using a realtor, it's going to cost them $12,000 just to sell it, plus the cost of concessions, giving people money as a concession to buy, and then closing costs, which can be up to 3%. And you guys, excuse me, I'm just getting over the flu, so that's why I sound a little bit like Mr. Snuffleupagus. Hopefully that won't change the quality of the content that you find here. So if they try to sell using a realtor, they're going to be upside down about 20 grand. So how many people who own a $200,000 house have $20,000 sitting in the bank? Not many. So here's another option. They can file bankruptcy, the homeowner can, but that doesn't stop the foreclosure. It only stalls it temporarily. What happens after a homeowner files bankruptcy is that the lender then files what's called a relief of stay, with the state, which allows them to take the house out of bankruptcy and foreclose on it. So now the homeowner is in bankruptcy and foreclosure. So the next option is a short sale by someone like you. Obviously the best option, and we're going to explain exactly why. But first, we've looked at what the options are for the homeowner. Let's look at what the options are for the bank. Well, they can foreclose, but that's very costly. Here's why. Let's take this $200,000 home example, and let's say that their mortgage payment is $1,500. Now, with an aggressive mortgage, it's easy for that to be the case. And on a lot of these 100% financed homes, the mortgage is higher because the interest rate is higher as well. So let's say they're paying $1,500 a month, and let's say that the bank goes to foreclose. Well, it's going to take at least 9 months before they get this recouped. By the time that they file all the documents, get it into foreclosure, foreclose on it, put it into the REO department, get it starting to market, and then find a buyer and close, you're looking at least 9 months. And in some states, it could easily be double that. So this is just an example. So let's just say it's 9 months. Since the homeowner is not paying that mortgage anymore, the bank obviously has to because they borrowed the money. They also have to pay the taxes and the insurance because the homeowner is not paying it. Then somebody has to pay the attorney's fees to foreclose. That would be the lender. Somebody has to pay for the cost of sale, marketing, which is realtor fees. Somebody has to pay for the possible eviction costs. Somebody has to pay for damage repair in case the property is in need of upkeep. And somebody has to pay for closing costs. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's just a list to give you an idea of how expensive it is for a bank in real money for them to foreclose on a house. Get the picture? So let's add this up. Holding costs of about $13,000. And let me just say, this is an example, and so these numbers will be averages. They're ballpark. It's going to vary based on the state, based on how long the foreclosure process takes in that state, and the cost of attorneys, obviously, and various other things like taxes and insurance. But for an example, this will work fine. So we've got holding costs of about $13,500. Tax and insurance vary. Let's use $1,000. Let's say it's $7,000 to foreclose after doing the auction, advertising the auction, etc., etc. Realtor's fees of $10,000. Closing costs with concessions. In a down market, it's very typical to make concessions. Not looking good. Not looking so good, is it? I mean, at this point, without any miscellaneous expenses, without any repairs, the bank's going to net about $160,000 off of their $200,000 loan. And here's the kicker. And that's if they get their money in 9 months. So the bank is in a bit of a pickle, and the homeowner is in a bit of a pickle. And this is a great opportunity for entrepreneur. How about enterprising? Enterprising people like you and I to step in and offer assistance to both of these parties. So, if you had a choice between, this is the question to qualify you as a genius. If you had a choice between maybe $160,000 in 9 months, or say $163,000 now, which one would you choose? And this is the whole crux of why it makes sense for a bank to accept a short sale. The question isn't, is a bank going to lose money in a foreclosure? The question is, how much are they going to lose? And when are they ever going to get it back? If you've ever had a loan that you've made to someone and they didn't pay you back, wondering if they ever would is kind of a harrowing experience. Having endured that very thing myself, I can speak from experience, having lent a lot of money to someone and then not having it paid back. It's disappointing. So if you can go to the bank and say, hey, look, How about if we give you $163,000 and we'll close in 60 days? Well, it just makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, $160,000 in 9 months or $163,000 now,